Picture this. In less than 24 hours, global oil markets swung by $12 a barrel. A single post on X, formerly Twitter, sent shockwaves through commodity trading floors from London to Singapore. Shipping companies scrambled to reroute tankers carrying 20% of the world's oil supply. And in Tehran, streets erupted, not with anti-government protesters, but with regime supporters, furious, betrayed, demanding answers from the very people they had backed for decades. That is the reality of Iran right now. A country tearing itself apart from the inside. A regime that just handed away its most powerful leverage with a single social media post. And a supreme leader, the man supposedly in charge of it all, who has not been seen or heard from in over a month. Welcome to World Brief Daily. If you're new here, this channel is your deep dive source for the military, geopolitical, and economic stories that are reshaping the world. And the story we are covering today may be one of the most consequential developments of this entire conflict. So make sure you are subscribed. Tap that subscribe button right now, because what is unfolding in Iran in real time is moving faster than almost any news cycle can track, and you do not want to miss a single update. Let's get into it. The sequence of events that blew up the Islamic Republic's internal order began on a Friday. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi posted a statement on X that stunned the world. In his own words, and here is the exact post attributed directly to the foreign minister, he wrote that, in line with the ceasefire in Lebanon, passage for all commercial vessels through the Strait of Hormuz is declared completely open for the remaining period of the ceasefire. He went even further, saying in a separate post that Iran had agreed to never close the Strait of Hormuz again. Read that again. Never close it again. That statement didn't just surprise the international community, it detonated inside Iran's own government like a grenade. Within hours, parliament leaders were denouncing it. IRGC commanders were furious. Pro-regime media channels were in visible disarray. And the political faction that had been carefully navigating negotiations with the United States, the faction that thought this was their moment, suddenly found itself under siege from every direction inside the regime. And here is the context. You absolutely need to understand why this matters so much. The Strait of Hormuz is a 21-mile-wide choke point at the mouth of the Persian Gulf. Through that narrow passage flows roughly 20% of all the oil and liquefied natural gas traded globally. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, around 17 million barrels of oil pass through that strait every single day. When Iran threatened to close it, or actually restricted traffic through it, global energy markets went into a state of near panic. Oil prices climbed above $100 a barrel. That price spike was not just an economic inconvenience. It was political pressure on the United States, on Europe, on every government that depended on cheap energy to keep its economy stable. That was Iran's leverage. That was the one card in their hand. And on Friday, their own foreign minister played it for free. The reaction in global markets was instantaneous. As reported by The Week, oil prices dropped $12 a barrel in the hours following Araghchi's post. Markets that had been bracing for a prolonged disruption suddenly exhaled. The fear premium that had been baked into crude prices for weeks began to evaporate. Traders who had been pricing in war risk started to unwind their positions. From a pure financial standpoint, Iran just gave the United States and global markets exactly what they wanted, without extracting a single concession in return. No sanctions relief, no end to the naval blockade, no long-term peace framework, nothing. Let that sink in for a moment, because it is worth understanding just how significant the oil price dynamic is to this entire conflict. When the war began and Iran started restricting traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, energy markets did exactly what they always do under that kind of threat. They priced in risk. Oil climbed above $100 a barrel. Gasoline prices in the United States crept upward. Heating fuel costs in Europe spiked. Every driver filling their tank, every airline calculating its fuel costs, every manufacturer running industrial equipment, they all felt the pressure. And that pressure translated into political pressure on the Trump administration, on European governments, on every leader whose approval ratings are partly tied to energy costs. That was the mechanism. That was how Iran planned to force concessions at the negotiating table. Not through military might. Their military is largely shattered, but through economic pain transmitted to voters through gasoline prices. And with one tweet, their foreign minister removed that mechanism. Oil prices dropped below $90 for the first time in weeks. They were above $100 that very morning and fell as low as $83 a barrel within the same trading session. The economic and political pressure on Washington evaporated almost instantly. Whatever leverage Iran had in the ongoing negotiations drained away in real time on live market feeds for everyone to see. And this is where the internal earthquake inside Iran really begins. Because here is what you need to understand about how Iran is actually governed right now. Iran does not have a single unified government. It has multiple power centers, all competing, all suspicious of one another, all trying to make sure that when this war eventually ends, they are the ones who come out on top. You have the presidential administration under President Masoud Pezeshkian. You have the parliament led by Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf. You have the foreign ministry under Araghchi. And then you have the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, which is not merely a military force. It is a parallel state within a state with its own media networks, its own economic interests, and its own chain of command. According to Iran International, the IRGC, now led by Commander Ahmad Vahidi, following the death of his predecessor in the February 28th strikes, has effectively moved into a position of de facto control over the government. President Pezeshkian has been sidelined. When he attempted to appoint a new intelligence minister, Vahidi reportedly blocked it outright, insisting that during wartime, all critical leadership positions must be controlled directly by the IRGC. The president has reportedly sought an urgent meeting with the new supreme leader on multiple occasions. Every single request has gone unanswered. This is not normal politics. Under Iran's political system, presidents have traditionally nominated intelligence ministers after securing the approval of the supreme leader. The supreme leader holds ultimate authority over the key security portfolios. But with the supreme leader's condition and location unclear, the IRGC has simply filled that vacuum. It has established what reporting from Iran International describes as a strict security cordon around Mojtaba Khamenei, restricting access to government reports and blocking communication between the supreme leader and the political leadership, including the president himself. Whether Mojtaba Khamenei is a willing participant in this arrangement or whether he is effectively being controlled by the institution that forced his appointment is a question that may not have a clear answer from the outside. The Soufan Center, in its analysis of the leadership transition, noted that governance has visibly moved away from political institutions toward entrenched security actors with Revolutionary Guard backgrounds. In effect, a military council composed of senior IRGC officers is now making the day-to-day decisions for the Iranian state. And that brings us to the most extraordinary detail in this entire story. Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of the assassinated Ali Khamenei, has not appeared on video, has not spoken publicly, has not delivered a single audio address since being elevated to the highest position in the country. According to reporting from the Times of Israel, the IRGC forced through his selection under enormous political pressure, seeing him as a more controllable figure than his father. 8 members of the Assembly of Experts reportedly threatened to boycott the vote over what they described as heavy pressure from IRGC commanders. The announcement was delayed for hours precisely because so many influential figures inside the regime opposed the choice. And since then, silence. A few text-based statements have been published under his name, but someone else is reading them. No video, no confirmed audio, no verified public appearance. The condition and whereabouts of the man who is constitutionally the highest authority in Iran remain, as Iran International described it, unclear. Think about that for a moment. The country is at war. Its ports are under a naval blockade. Its economy is in freefall. Its political factions are openly attacking each other. And the supreme leader, the man whose word is supposed to be final, is effectively invisible. When you understand that, everything else about the chaos of this past week makes perfect sense. Now back to Foreign Minister Araghchi and the statement that started the latest firestorm. Iranian state media outlet Tasnim News Agency, which is broadly aligned with the IRGC, put out a scathing response to the foreign minister's post. In language that was anything but diplomatic, they called the statement creating confusion, and ambiguity inside the country. They added that passage through the strait would be, and this is important, controlled by the IRGC. Any ship wanting to transit would need to coordinate directly with the IRGC Navy. This was not a minor editorial disagreement. This was the military arm of the Iranian state publicly contradicting the head of its own diplomatic corps. If you need more proof of the depth of the fracture, look at what happened next. Iran lawmaker Mustafa Mohammadi called for the impeachment of Araghchi over his social media remarks. As reported by Iranian wire services, Mohammadi accused the foreign minister of making ill-timed statements during a sensitive wartime period, adding that this was not the first time Araghchi had made what he described as strange and untimely statements during critical moments. He stated bluntly that if it were not for the excuse of war, the foreign minister would already have been impeached. And then there was Ayatollah Muzani, a former culture minister who issued his own public warning. He stated that if the Supreme National Security Council, the highest security body in Iran, fails to act quickly during sensitive moments and fails to control the narrative, Iran will suffer severe damage in what he called psychological warfare and the war of narratives. In plain language, he was saying, we are losing the propaganda war, and we are losing it because our own people keep saying the wrong things at the wrong time. He is not wrong. There is a critical economic dimension to this that deserves attention, and it reveals just how badly Iran's leverage strategy has actually performed, even before Araghchi's statement. According to Iran International, early in the war, Iran moved to control traffic through the Strait of Hormuz and began charging tankers approximately $2 million each for transit permits. A committee was established under the Supreme National Security Council to manage the process. Expectations inside the regime were high. This was supposed to generate significant revenue while also demonstrating Iran's control over the waterway. The actual results? Approximately 60 permits issued, payment requests sent for just 8 shipments, and the total amount of funds actually collected? 0. Not a single dollar. Iran's grand plan to monetize control of the world's most strategically vital shipping lane produced essentially nothing. And now, with Araghchi's statement and the subsequent reversal, even the symbolic control over the strait has been thrown into question. As Fox News reported, citing a regional intelligence official, the Strait of Hormuz is now described as under full IRGC control and effectively closed. Multiple vessels were forced to turn around after the reversal. The IRGC reportedly opened fire on at least one tanker. India summoned Iran's ambassador after 2 Indian-flagged vessels were involved in incidents near the strait, with Indian Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri conveying deep concern to Tehran. So within the span of roughly 24 hours, Iran went from declaring the strait open forever to closing it again to firing on ships. This is not a country with a coherent strategic direction. This is a country watching its own leadership structure collapse in real time. And that is a perfect moment to remind you. If you are getting value from this breakdown, make sure you are subscribed to World Brief Daily and have notifications turned on. Hit the bell icon, because we are going to keep covering this story with the depth and clarity it deserves, and you do not want to find out days later what you missed. Now let us talk about the man who has become the loudest voice pushing back against the chaos, and why his credibility is deeply questionable. Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf issued a response to both Araghchi's statement and President Trump's public claims about the negotiations. His statement was forceful. Point by point, he dismissed Trump's assertions as lies. All 7 of them, he said, made in the span of 1 hour. He declared that the U.S. blockade meant the strait would not remain open. He insisted that passage would be based on designated routes with Iranian authorization. And he delivered what was probably the most ironic line of the entire episode, warning that whether the strait is open or closed will be determined by the field, not by social media. Even as it was his own foreign minister colleague who had opened the whole crisis with a social media post. But here is why Ghalibaf's credibility is worth scrutinizing. This is the same man who, before the latest round of negotiations in Pakistan, publicly stated he would not travel to Islamabad unless there was first a ceasefire in Lebanon. There was no ceasefire. He went anyway. The ceasefire happened days later. This is a politician with a documented habit of saying one thing and doing another. His public image is built on projecting resolve and discipline. the tough negotiator, the man who will not blink. But his actual track record reveals a pattern of announced red lines, followed by quiet, unpublicized crossings of those same red lines. So when he now insists the strait is firmly under Iranian control and that no concessions have been made, you are entitled to wonder whether that statement reflects reality or whether it reflects the internal political pressure he is under to appear strong after a humiliating public contradiction. And the context of his pushback matters too. He was not just responding to Araghchi's statement, he was also responding directly to President Trump, who had publicly claimed that Iran agreed to all of his demands, including allowing the U.S. to inspect its remaining nuclear facilities. Iran's foreign ministry called that claim false and baseless. President Pezeshkian's office maintained that Iran's position had not changed in any way, and Ghalibaf dismissed all 7 of Trump's assertions as outright lies. The problem is that when every faction of your own government is putting out contradictory statements within a 48-hour window, your blanket denial of the other side's claims loses credibility fast. Observers are not choosing between Trump's account and Ghalibaf's account. They are watching a regime argue with itself and drawing their own conclusions. There is another layer to this story that we need to discuss because it connects the chaos inside Iran to a very specific individual living in Glendale, California. Over the course of this war, analysts and observers have noted something unusual about Ghalibaf's official Twitter account. The English in the post was not just fluent, it was sophisticated. It demonstrated a grasp of American cultural psychology, internet subculture, and what you might call Gen Z communication patterns, the kind of English and the kind of messaging choices that someone deep inside the Iranian government machinery would be extremely unlikely to produce on their own. Iranian Wire conducted an investigation, and according to their findings, the man believed to be running this account is Maysam Zamanbadi. He lives in Glendale, California. He comes from a family with connections to the Islamic Republic's elite. He has a documented history of running pro-regime media networks, and according to the investigation, he previously served as a personal advisor to Ghalibaf back in 2003, and it appears he may have returned to that role during the war. Now, consider the profound irony of this. Here is someone who reportedly loves the Islamic Republic enough to run influence operations on its behalf, who wants to protect a regime that has spent decades brutalizing 92 million Iranians, who works to craft messaging that shields the system from accountability. And he does all of this from the comfort of Glendale, California, inside the country that the Islamic Republic officially designates as the Great Satan. He is not alone in this hypocrisy. The children and grandchildren of Chinese Communist Party elites are educated at Western universities. The families of Russian oligarchs live in mansions in London and Dubai. The scions of Iran's revolutionary elite hold foreign passports and maintain apartments in cities from Los Angeles to Toronto. They are willing to extend the lifespan of oppressive systems, provided they themselves never have to live inside them. And that pattern tells you something important about the true nature of these regimes. The people most committed to preserving them are also the people most committed to keeping themselves safely outside their reach. Now let us zoom out and look at the bigger picture, because what is happening inside Iran is not just a domestic political drama. It has profound implications for the trajectory of this conflict and for the global economy. The war itself began on February 28th, according to Al Jazeera's reporting, and has killed more than 3,000 people. The U.S.-Israel strikes targeted Iran's nuclear facilities, with President Trump stating publicly that the facilities had been set back by months and were under intense satellite surveillance. Iran retaliated with strikes on U.S. bases in the region. Negotiations have been attempted in Pakistan and were expected to move to Vienna. Every round of talks has produced contradictions, walkbacks, and collapsed expectations. The fundamental problem is this: the United States is negotiating with a regime that does not have a unified chain of command. When Araghchi makes a commitment, the IRGC can simply override it, and has done exactly that. When Ghalibaf says the strait will remain closed, shipping companies do not know whether to believe him or the foreign minister. When the new supreme leader issues a text statement, there is no way to independently verify it is actually coming from him. Militarily, as was discussed openly in the original analysis, Iran has almost no conventional military capacity remaining after the strikes. The Air Force and missile infrastructure that survived is severely degraded. The IRGC's primary remaining leverage is its ability to use drone swarms and naval assets to disrupt shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. That is it. That is the entire military threat picture. And even that leverage has now been compromised by the foreign minister's announcement, and the subsequent chaotic reversal only compounds the credibility damage. As reported by the crisis group, Trump made his position clear in a public statement. He would consider a ceasefire when Hormuz Strait is open, free, and clear. Iran's parliament spokesman Ebrahim Rezaieh has said Iran will not agree to extend any ceasefire if it does not include Iranian control of the strait. Those two positions are completely incompatible, and with no credible central authority in Tehran able to make a binding commitment that all factions will honor, it is extremely difficult to see how any negotiated settlement holds. The economic pressure on Iran is severe and worsening. The naval blockade of Iranian ports is ongoing. The Iranian rial has continued to lose value. The oil revenue that the regime depends on for both military spending and subsidies to maintain domestic stability has been dramatically reduced. Iran's attempt to generate revenue from Hormuz transit permits, the plan that was supposed to turn the choke point into a cash cow, has, as we noted, produced essentially nothing. And yet within Iran, the public narrative being pushed by regime-aligned media is one of resistance, defiance, and eventual victory. The propaganda effort is real. It is being run by people like the individual in Glendale. It is sophisticated in its targeting of Western and specifically American audiences. But as Ayatollah Muzani himself admitted, Iran is losing the information war. The contradictions are too glaring. The own goals, like the foreign minister's post, are too damaging. The internal fractures are too visible. Even the regime's attempts at military propaganda have become a source of dark comedy rather than credibility. As the original reporting noted, Iranian-aligned accounts began circulating images claiming they had shot down a B-2 Spirit stealth bomber over Tehran, a $2 billion aircraft. The supposed evidence showed a complete, intact B-2 being transported through the city on a flatbed truck. The absurdity was obvious to anyone who understood even basic physics. A bomber falling from 50,000 feet does not land on the ground in one piece. U.S. Central Command had to formally confirm that all 4 B-2s that conducted strikes on Iran had returned safely to Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. The regime is not winning the propaganda war. It is not winning the economic war. It is not winning the military confrontation. And now it is not even presenting a unified front in the diplomatic arena. What it does retain is the capacity to create chaos. And in a conflict this complex, chaos itself has strategic value. Every day that the situation remains unresolved, every incident involving a tanker in the strait, every contradictory statement from a different faction of the Iranian government keeps the pressure alive, keeps oil markets on edge, and gives hardliners within the regime a reason to continue resisting. But the window in which that strategy can function is narrowing. The U.S. blockade is not going away. The economic pain inside Iran is intensifying. And the internal political fractures we have been watching this week are not going to heal themselves. Not with a supreme leader who no one can reach, not with a president who has been sidelined by the military, and not with a foreign minister who is now fighting for his own political survival after one social media post. The Iranian people, 92 million of them, are living through the consequences of decisions made by a handful of factions who are more concerned with their own power than with the welfare of the country. The crowds protesting in Tehran this week are not dissidents risking their lives against the regime. They are regime supporters who feel betrayed by the people they trusted. Even the base is fracturing. Only time will tell whether this moment represents the beginning of the end for the Islamic Republic's current power structure, or whether the system finds a way, as it has before, to suppress the internal contradictions and present a unified face to the outside world. History suggests that regimes in this kind of pressure rarely collapse cleanly or quickly. But the cracks we are watching form in real time are not cosmetic. They run deep. We will, of course, keep you updated on every major development. The negotiations in Vienna, if they happen, the status of the naval blockade, the fate of Foreign Minister Araghchi, and any sign of life from the new supreme leader. The The story is moving fast, and this is exactly the kind of coverage World Brief Daily was built to provide. So if you have not subscribed yet, now is the perfect time. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay with us. There is a lot more to come, and as always, thanks for watching.